I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try. I just want to thank all of you for loving Eugene. I think it was his capacity for love that made him so big, because he kept taking it in and giving it out, and there was never any end to it. I had a couple of Gene vignettes that I wanted to share with you, because maybe some of you haven't heard about them, and they're very special to me, and I think they were special to him too, but, and I'm sorry about this, but anyway, Eugene was my big brother in many, many ways. And he always treated me like I was his little kid sister, even though when I got to be a very old lady, which I am now. And I remember I took my son Stephen to visit his Uncle Gene in New York, and Stephen at the time was an infant in my arms. And I remember sitting on the couch across from Henri Langlois, and Stephen was sitting in my lap, and I thought, isn't this wonderful? Eugene seeing his nephew for the first time, and Stephen seeing his uncle for the first time, and Eugene looked at me and he said, "Who said you could wear lipstick?" So he was just always my big brother, and he just never let me forget that, for which I am very grateful. The other thing that I wanted to share with all of you, which you may not know, or maybe you do, was his enormous love for the countryside of Vermont and New Hampshire. Several times he kind of got up the courage to get himself in the bus and come up to northern New Hampshire and stay with me for a week or so. And he would just talk to me forever about the beauty of the landscape as he was going by. And we would go for rides, long rides in the woods. I would rent a special van that would accommodate his scooter or wheelchair, whatever the heck it was at that moment in time. And we would go through the deepest of the deep woods where the roads were just dirt roads, and God knows what lurked in there. And Eugene was just, it was like he was in heaven. He loved it so much. And he kept saying, stop here, I want to take a picture, stop there, I want to take a picture. No, back up, it's not the right picture. And so it was a miracle we ever got out of those woods. But he loved it up there, and every time I go down those roads and go by the lake that he liked so much, then I think of him. But I think the greatest of his loves, I know, his huge great love was for films, but I think the greatest of his loves was for his students. And I think that some of you are here today. I hope many of you are here today. But I want you to know how much he loved you, despite how badly he abused you in his class. And I was there at some of those classes, and I'd be going, oh my God. But he adored you. And he knew that each and every one of you had the capacity to be the next Alfred Hitchcock or the next Francois Truffaut. And he believed that with all of his heart. But I think Gene's greatest gift is this theater. This is his gift to the city of New York, a city that he adored and loved. And I remember he showed me the theater the day or two before we opened. We came here, just the two of us, and I guess it was in the big theater over there, and he scooted down the aisle and went up to his seat on the aisle, which he loved. And he showed me a movie. Just the two of us sitting there, and just as he said in the film, as the curtain opened and we watched Rescue Dawn, which was quite a movie. And so that was my first experience of this wonderful, beautiful theater. And I hope that it goes on forever and ever, and I hope that you all get to show your movies here someday. Gene used to have lots of sayings, and I'll just say this last saying and then I will stop talking. And I used to cherish these things that he would say, and they seemed to kind of spring from his head, just, fully formed. And it was usually in response to me kvetching or griping or moaning about something. And when I was done bending his ear, there would be this silence, and then he would simply say, "Who can fathom the unfathomable?" So thank you very, very much.
Well, I'm the middle sibling. Very blessed to be in the middle of beautiful sister and Gene. And I forgot how melancholy that beautiful film that was made by Anat was. I haven't watched it in a few months, but it was very beautifully made. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming this afternoon. Gene's friends, former students, relatives, some of whom I haven't seen in, is it 55 years or 60 years? It's a bit daunting, but it's wonderful to see you all again. And I thought I was going to have the opportunity of telling you some secrets about Gene, especially cartoon caterers, but the film, I forgot, preempted that. But it's true about cartoon caterers. We got together in Brookline, Massachusetts, and Gene found a way of getting an old 16 millimeter projector. I think maybe that was the origin of his love affair with 16 millimeter. I never could understand what was so mystical about a measurement. But he was in love with 16 millimeter. In the last days, I remember visiting him in New York. In spite of his lifelong addiction to 16 millimeter, he nevertheless was able to change, and he said to me, in this theater as a matter of fact, he said, "Well, 16 millimeter isn't so great after all." I had to pick myself off the floor, because if you've ever been to Gene's apartment and been privileged to be at one of his showings, he had not one but two electrically powered screens that would come down from the ceiling, and he had cinemascope anamorphic lenses in his little projection booth, which, Stephen, you know very well because you dismantled it, right? And he would say that nothing can compare to 16 millimeter. You can go watch this on your television, and you can look at Cottage to Let or some obscure Vittorio De Sica film, and you can never see it better than in my apartment. And then a couple years later he said, "But ever since the SVA Theater and its digital technology, I don't like 16 millimeter anymore," which I couldn't believe. It's kind of like, put a stake through my heart when he said that. But at any rate, in those early years, it was a lot of fun doing cartoon caterers. I remember we set up shop next to our house's old coal bin. There was an old coal bin there. And we put flyers around the neighborhood for the kids to come. And of course, we didn't charge any money. And we watched, we were a little too young to watch Fellini and Kurosawa and Satyajit Ray, but we did watch Andy Panda and Woody Woodpecker and the Little Rascals. So that was how we all began. But from those early days, I realized that maybe film wasn't the most central thing in his life, as my sister pointed out. Maybe the most central thing in Gene's life was his love of other people and sharing things. He got his true delight in opening his door and welcoming people into his apartment or his theater, and just sitting there in the dark, sharing beauty with other people. And that's what I remember most of all. When he first moved to New York, I remember, and everything he did had a wonderful sense of humor, a beautiful sense of humor. I remember when he moved into his first apartment. Some of you may remember this. It was on Park Avenue South. I think it was on 24th Street and Park Avenue South, when apartments were around $120 a month. believe it or not. And he moved into Kate Smith's old building. And it had an elevator which defied the concept of Kate Smith coming down in the elevator. Apologies to Kate Smith, but whatever. And he would say to me as we were going down the elevator, he'd say, well, if Kate was in the elevator with you, you better make sure you were going down. We always, and then he moved into other places, which you might not have known. The next place he moved into was a place on Riverside Drive, where the rents were even less. And then he moved to Gustav Mahler's old building on East 73rd Street. Some of you may remember that, which he bequeathed to me after he moved out. And I could barely afford the rent at that point. He had chosen movies, of course, and I had chosen books. Seemingly both doomed professions at this point. But at any rate, it was a great relationship, though. I would always get him books about film, and he would always show me films about novels. So it was a perfect two-way street. As a matter of fact, he got really excited one day because they had actually filmed a movie in the 70s in my bookstore, which used to be at the corner of 8th and McDougal. They filmed Cactus Flower, and Ingrid Bergman came in. And so he got a particular thrill out of that. But at any rate, we used to kid around a lot about his entrepreneurship and what he wanted to do in life, which was finally realized in the Cinematheque and this theater. And I told him one day, we had gotten a book about the Roxy Theater. Probably some of you remember the Roxy Theater, I guess, but it was started by Samuel Roxy Rothafeld. And I said, I think you bear a little resemblance to Sammy Rothafeld. And he said, well, he always dreamed of opening a movie theater that was so large that he could command an army of ushers, which is what the Roxy Theater had. I think it had like 300 ushers. And every morning, Mr. Rothafeld would line them up like troops, and they'd show him their white gloves, and he would approve of their white gloves, and that was his dream. So he didn't get to be Sammy Rothafeld, but at least his legacy is in hundreds and hundreds of adoring students and loving friends, and this theater, which I hope will stand the test of time. I used to like to tag along behind him when he founded the Boston University Film Society, and it was wonderful on the one hand, being around 14 years old and him dragging me into the living room and saying, well, tonight we're going to watch the early films of Vittorio De Sica. And I went, oh, really? Who's that? And of course I was skeptical because at that point I just wanted to play baseball and do whatever ostensibly normal kids do. But gradually I got to like the early films of Vittorio De Sica, along with all of the other wonderful films that he's introduced hundreds and hundreds of people to. From there, he went on to do things like establish a Polish film festival, of all things, in Boston in the 1960s. I don't know if you remember that, Laurel, but he got the Polish consulate to foot the bill for a Polish film festival, and nobody had really seen Polish films at that point. And I remember we took up residence in an old movie theater in Boston, which showed 3 films for 60 cents a day. And he ordered me to run the projectors. And I didn't know anything about running projectors. And so there were these old projectors that had these carbon arcs, which are these 2 pieces of carbon that high voltage electricity would go through, and when they touched, it created a light like the sun. And if you looked at it without looking through smoked glass, you would go instantly blind. He forgot to tell me that. So I wandered around a long time in the theater without seeing it. At any rate, one afternoon as we were showing something like the great films of Andrzej Wajda, The Canal, which they named that new French production agency after, I guess. I think, maybe not, but that one of the carbon arcs malfunctioned and it started to explode and burn. and all the dignitaries in the audience were going crazy, didn't know what to do. And then if you've ever seen Cinema Paradiso, there's that scene where he projects the film on a wall in a little Italian town, and the film starts to burn and bubble up and get all brown, and it looks like the end of the world. Well, that's what happened at the Polish Film Festival, and all I could hear were Polish officials screaming in Polish. Finally, he ran up to the projection booth and pushed me out of the way, and he figured out how to fix the problem. But that was funny. And if it weren't for that festival, I would never have known, other than Gene, that Zbigniew Zabulski was the James Dean of Polish cinemas. How many of you knew that? Raise your hands if you knew that. Well, I didn't know it, but Gene knew it. Anyway, I don't really have to tell you after seeing the film and hearing my sister how much he loved the movies. When we used to visit him in New York, we would often have to slink into the apartment because he was in the middle of a screening for Douglas Fairbanks or Dustin Hoffman or Stephen B. or Stephen Harper's nephew, or C.J. Gardella, who we have to thank for most of this event tonight. It was wonderful. Just give a little applause for C.J. Beautifully put together. Of course, the best moments occurred during the real changes, when Gene would elucidate about the film with some bit of trivia, like telling us that Gary Cooper's really disliked the lost gem of a film, Peter Ibbotson, because he thought he was miscast in it. Okay, well, you take stuff like that away and you can amaze people at cocktail parties, I guess. But to Gene, it was important stuff. And if you've been lucky enough to attend enough screenings with Gene, you'd soon come to realize that his favorite director and master of the English language comedy, in spite of the fact that English wasn't his native language, was Billy Wilder. I would always delight in going to Gene's apartment and watching a Billy Wilder film. Wilder was brilliant, irascible, and hilarious, and his quips were as good as his scripts. Both Gene and I especially adored 1, 2, 3, which is kind of a relic now because it's all about the Cold War, but if you haven't seen 1, 2, 3, see it. You'll be rolling in the aisles. And one of his quips that Gene told me, I never knew this was the same, when Wilder said, "If there's anything I hate more than not being taken seriously, it's being taken too seriously." I think that kind of epitomized my brother. He was serious about films, but he always had a wonderful sense of humor and a wonderful sense of sharing. But I think another one of his favorite quotes, and it wasn't from Billy Wilder, this is the one that I'll always remember with Gene, and I still remember to this day. I think it's the best quip ever related about Hollywood, had to do with Victor Mature. Remember, Victor Mature was a matinee idol of the 1950s. He made films like The Robe, Kiss of Death. He always had this kind of sad, bloodhoundy face that women found strangely attractive. And he was the actor that the Harvard Hasty Pudding Society gave the, quote, "Thank you, Victor Mature, for not making another movie this year" award back in the 1960s. But Gene and I kind of had a soft spot in our heart for Victor Mature because of what happened in Hollywood. He had applied for a membership in a very posh golf club in Hollywood, and the director of membership approached him and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Mature, but it's the policy of the club not to offer memberships to actors." To which Victor replied in eternal fashion, or everlasting fashion, he said, "Actor?" He said, "I'm no actor, and I have the reviews to prove it." So Gene liked that one, I like that one too. I'll tell you, well, judging from your wonderful tributes to my brother today, I can only say that he was a great teacher, friend, and a brother. And I have the reviews to prove it. And to this day, I like to think that he's up there somewhere showing cartoons to the angels.
I'm going to do a little shopping. My name is Susan Rice, and I'm a recovering, sorry. I'm Susan Rice, and I'm a dear friend of Gene's, and this is Andrew Smith, also a dear friend, and we are going to say our words in commemoration of him in just a few minutes. But first, I want to read a letter that has been sent by Donald Ross, a dear friend of Gene's, who in fact I think gave him his apartment on West 10th Street many years ago. Donald says this: Eugene made me a filmaholic. We met in 1960, my freshman year at BU, in a class called experimental film. I learned an experimental film was an out-of-focus black and white movie which lost money. Gene already knew this. My addiction started innocently enough, and every word is true. Boston, 1961. Eugene said, "You want to see the white hell of Pitzpaloo, a 1929 German silent film with Polish subtitles?" I should never have said yes. We got in his car, a red, or maybe it was green, Hillel might remember, a Dodge Dart that he called Bullet, and he drove a bunch of us to see the white hell of Pitzpaloo at Dartmouth. The white hell turned out to be the famous New England blizzard of 1961. We got to Dartmouth at midnight, missed the movie, and slept on someone's floor. Eugene got us a private showing the next morning before another 24-hour drive back, through the white hell. German silent films are not a good sign, with or without subtitles. Boston, 1964. Eugene was excited. Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove was opening next week. Let's go, Eugene insisted. Okay, we'll go next week, I said. Why wait? It opened in New York yesterday, Eugene said. In the Bullet we went, another full car, and one woman in the back seat was a complete stranger. Down to New York in time for the 4 o'clock show at Cinema 1, or was it Cinema 2? East Side, 3rd Avenue, except it was sold out. Back in the car, Eugene had a backup. Drive to Times Square, where it was also playing. Was it at the Victoria Theater or the Astor? We got back to Boston by midnight. If a cop had rolled up my sleeve, he would have found sprocket tracks. New York, 1966, Eugene phones. Want to see a movie? Sure. We go through the papers, seen it. What's at the MoMA? Seen it. Audie Murphy Westerns on 42nd Street, seen it. The out-of-town newspaper stand in Philadelphia. That's right, in Philadelphia. Just 100 miles down the Jersey Turnpike is a new picture, the 4th remake of Bojest. Hasn't opened in New York yet, may never open in New York. The Foreign Legion, Bojest starring Telly Savalas. Could I say no? If I could sink any lower, 4th remake, Foreign Legion in the Bullet to Philadelphia. I'd be here today, but I've locked myself in a pay toilet at Grauman's Chinese Theater. There's a Telly Savalas festival for the entire weekend. Not one of his films will be shown. Fortunately for all of us, Gene sold the Bullet and began running movies in his apartment. I love you, Eugene. Almost all my time with Gene was spent in the company of Andrew as well.
That's true. We were going to form a production company called ours, right?
Yes.
Which stood for?
Andy Rice Stavis, which is a joke that's totally missing now today because there was a scandal at the time based on Mandy Rice Davies, a British prostitute. And in any event, we thought that was damnably clever. Nobody else did. Everybody else does now.
He actually came up with a project that is now playing on Broadway. The thing about murdering people. Remember, where's their will? Remember?
Oh, A Gentleman's Guide, yeah. Well, we were called Ars Productions, by the way, also pretentious and not understood by anyone. And we had a motto, which was Latin. What was the Latin?
Ars gratis pecuniae.
Art for money's sake. And I don't think we came up with ideas. That was mainly what we did. We never saw anything to fruition, but we had a lot of fun in the process. I actually met Gene when I worked at the Motion Picture of America, my first job in 1965. He was working at Contemporary Films, a 16mm distribution company, and he shared a desk with Jonathan Demme, who became kind of famous himself. And when I met Gene at the Motion Picture Association, I loved him immediately. I called him Murray, after a greedy, unscrupulous film distributor, imaginary by the way, that we conjured up. And he called me Cookie. I'm not sure why. The third member of the film club was Peter Minichello, known as Slicker. And for some reason, Andrew never got a nickname. I have to tell you that at 1 o'clock in the morning last night, I was thinking about Gene and thinking about today, and I remembered that we had had jackets made for the film club, even though there were 3 or 4 of us. Anyway, I brought a visual aid. I brought it with me so you could see just how silly and devoted we were. This is the movie club jacket. I think all of us had one and never wore them. I think even Gene had one, if you can imagine Gene in a varsity jacket. But that was the varsity team that he played for, movies. I knew him in 73rd Street, I knew him on West 10th Street and at Waterside Plaza. And although the apartments got bigger, they also became more cluttered. In later years, we could hardly sit, and Murray could hardly stand. To listen to his voice, to look in his eyes, you would never know that he faced some very harsh difficulties in his life. He could bitch about people, but he never complained about his own lot. He was always positive. He was always funny.
You know, the thing about being funny, there are 2 people in my life who always seemed to be happy to hear from me, and one was my mother and one was Eugene Stavis. I'm not too sure about my mother, but the last conversation that I had with him, I called to set up another meeting with a visit with Susan and myself. And of course, he always answered the phone in that Eric Ballore Butler voice, you know, hello. And when I'd say, well, this is Andrew Smith, he always said, Ange! As if I just, come over the horizon and was a long-lost friend. It was, I can't tell you how cheery it was to call Gene, because he would always say, Ange! You called, you know. And then he would always throw out some piece of news. And in this occasion, he said, what do you think of the mayor, Mayor de Blasio? He's getting rid of all the horse and carriages at the plaza. And I said, I don't know. Maybe you ought to get rid of the prostitutes at the plaza first. To which Gene immediately said, but those would be horses of different color. No, horse. So speech of it. He did say, but those would be horrors of a different color. And I bring that up only because he was that fast, that funny, and there was no one like him. And of course, if you said to him, well, but wait a second, Gene, let's get serious, he would give you that Richard Pryor caught look. You know, he would go like that for you. But I obviously will never forget it.
Right after Murray, right after Eugene died, I called his answering machine just to hear his voice. He said, I'm not here right now, but I'll get back to you. I hope so, Murray, I hope so. Now Murray's dear friend, Arnie Kantrowitz, will appear on tape.
Hi, my name is Arnie Kantrowitz. I was a friend of Gene's. My memory